My life exists in the silence between notes. I'm Nico. I am a conservator of historical musical instruments. I deal in the physics of sound and the fragility of 300-year-old wood. I work in a lab with climate-controlled air and specialized lighting. I wear silk gloves, I use brushes made of squirrel hair, and I believe that anything louder than a whispered conversation is a personal assault. The job was the Van Hout organ. It was a massive, Baroque masterpiece built in 1712, currently residing in a decaying cathedral in Lower Manhattan that was being converted into a luxury art space. My task was to disassemble the console, the heart of the organ, and move it to my lab for a 6-month restoration. My nemesis for this project was Callum. Callum owned Atlas Rigging. He was the man the city called when they needed to move something that weighed 5 tons and wasn't meant to move. He was a mountain of a man, usually covered in a fine layer of drywall dust and axle grease. He wore steel-toed boots, heavy canvas pants, and a smirk that suggested he found my silk gloves hilarious. "All right, Professor," he rumbled the first morning, his voice echoing in the vaulted cathedral. "The hoist is rigged. We're ready to lift the heart out of this beast." "It is not a beast, Callum," I said, adjusting my spectacles. "It is a delicate ecosystem of ivory, ebony, and lead. If the vibration from your crane exceeds 3 Hz, I will hold you personally responsible for every hairline fracture." Callum just laughed, a deep sound that vibrated in his chest. 3 Hz. Got it. I'll tell the steel cables to be extra sensitive. For 3 days, we were locked in a stalemate. I was meticulously labeling every stop, every drawbar, every pedal. Callum was installing massive steel beams to support the weight of the floor. He was loud. He played classic rock from a battered radio. He smelled of cold air and peppermint gum. "You're too tight, Nico," he said on the 3rd afternoon, leaning against a marble pillar while I cleaned a single ivory key. "You're holding your breath so hard I'm surprised you haven't fainted." "Precision requires focus," I snapped. "Precision requires a steady hand. You're shaking." He walked over, his heavy boot silent on the stone floor. He stood behind me. He was a foot taller and twice as wide. The heat coming off him was like a furnace. "Take a breath." I didn't take a breath. I kept cleaning. The disaster happened during the final lift. The console was strapped into a custom steel cradle Callum had built. It was being hoisted out of the loft, dangling 40 feet above the stone floor of the nave. I was on the scaffolding, centimeters away from the console, monitoring the tilt sensors. Callum was on the floor, operating the remote control winch. "Looking good," Callum called up. "Steady as she goes." Then, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in a cathedral. A sharp, metallic ping. One of the secondary guide cables, a thin steel wire meant to keep the cradle from spinning, had snapped. The tension caused the wire to whip back, shattering a stained glass window and, more importantly, snagging the main pulley housing. The console lurched. It tilted 15 degrees to the left. "Stop!" I screamed. Callum hit the emergency brake. The 3-ton console bounced in the air, the cables groaning under the sudden shock. The sound of the groaning metal was like a dying god. "Don't move, Nico." Callum's voice was no longer a rumble. It was a command. The console was leaning. One of the main silk-lined straps had slipped. If it tilted another 5 degrees, the 1712 woodwork would slide right out of the cradle and smash into a billion splinters on the floor below. And I was on the scaffolding, my arm caught between the cradle and the support beam. "It's sliding!" I yelled, panic finally breaking through my sterile exterior. "Callum, it's sliding!" I saw him move. He didn't run for the stairs. He grabbed the emergency ladder, a vertical metal spine bolted to the wall, and he climbed it with a speed that defied his size. He was up the 40 feet in seconds. He swung himself onto the swaying scaffolding. It groaned under our combined weight. "I got you," he panted. His face was inches from mine. He was sweating, his eyes narrowed with intense focus. The console, the wood is scratching. I whimpered. Forget the wood. Give me your hand. He didn't wait for me to give it. He reached into the gap, his large, calloused hand gripping the steel edge of the cradle. He roared, a primal sound of pure physical exertion, and he pushed. He used his entire body as a human jack, shoving the 3-ton console back into its center of gravity. The lurching stopped. The weight settled back into the straps. Now, get your arm out. I pulled my arm free. My sleeve was torn, my skin bruised, but I was out. Callum didn't let go. He kept his shoulder pressed against the steel cradle, holding the weight steady while the emergency brakes held the cable. Okay, he breathed, his chest heaving. Okay. We're good. It's balanced. He stayed there for a full minute, holding the weight of history on his shoulder, until the secondary safety lines could be secured by his crew below. When the console was finally lowered to the floor, safe and intact, I couldn't move. I sat on the base of a stone statue, my hands over my face, shaking violently. I had almost watched 3 centuries of beauty vanish. I had almost lost my arm. I felt a heavy shadow fall over me. Callum sat down on the floor at my feet. He was wrecked. His t-shirt was torn, his knuckles were bleeding where they'd hit the steel, and he was covered in dust. Hey, he said softly. I looked up. I was crying. I was a professional, a conservator, and I was sobbing like a child. It's safe, I whispered. Yeah, he said. He reached out and, for the first time, he took off one of my silk gloves. He didn't ask. He just pulled it off, revealing my trembling hand. He took my hand in his. His skin was rough, hot, and smelled of ozone and metal. His grip was the most solid thing I had ever felt. You're okay, Nico, he murmured. The beast is safe. You're safe. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had just risked his life to save a piece of wood because he knew I loved it. The silence between us was different now. It wasn't the silence of a lab. It was the silence of the aftermath. You're a brute, Callum, I whispered, a shaky laugh catching in my throat. And you're a high-maintenance librarian, he smiled. He didn't let go of my hand. He pulled me toward him. He didn't stand up, he just leaned in from where he was sitting on the floor. The kiss was a collision of worlds. It tasted of peppermint and the salt of my own tears. His beard was rough against my face, and his hands, those huge, powerful hands, were surprisingly gentle as they cupped my jaw. I grabbed the front of his dusty t-shirt, pulling him closer, needing the heat and the reality of him to drown out the memory of the snapping cable. We broke apart, our foreheads resting against each other in the dim light of the cathedral. So, Callum whispered, his thumb tracing my lower lip. How many hertz was that? I let out a long, shaky breath. Incalculable, I said. He grinned. Good. Because I'm not done with the restoration yet.